Good morning. Hey, everybody. It's Friday. It's just after 10 o'clock in the morning. It's 10:09. We're getting a little bit of a late start today. Thank you guys for tuning in. You've reached the Real Estate Fix with Rich on KHTS, AM 1220, FM 98.1, your hometown station. Thank you guys for tuning in today. I appreciate it. We had a good show today. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're talking all about landlord-tenant stuff. Those of you who don't know, I'll tell you. Those of you who do know, this will be a refresher. The laws in California have changed very dramatically recently, having to do with landlord-tenant stuff, and it is a nightmare. The state, as usual, has chosen to do some things that, while they're trying to prevent one problem, they're creating a much larger problem. Actually, it's the same problem. They're making the problem even worse. In their attempts to curtail homelessness, they're making it far, far worse. And we're going to talk about that today. We have a special guest, my lovely wife, Jane. Sherman's going to be in. She is a real estate attorney, and she has her MBA as well. And so she's kind of the brains of the operation. I just sound like I know what I'm talking about because I listen to her and I repeat what she has to say a lot of the time. But we're going to go straight to the source. We're going to have her in today. And we're talking about all sorts of things, landlord, tenant, and the new laws and the disclosures and all just the craziness that surrounds this. I've got some other stuff to do, but first we're going to do a quick public service announcement here. There is a fundraiser. We were talking about last 2 weeks ago. There's a fundraiser for BBMS, Happy Children Memorial Fund. It's for survivors of domestic violence and people overcoming addiction. And it is, let's see, live music and hot dogs and chili dogs and all kinds of stuff in front of the Green Valley Market, 16166 Monkey Canyon Road in Green Valley from 11 to 2 p.m. on April 20th. So if you don't have anything to do with your Saturday there, April 20th, I think it's Saturday, April 20th, 11 to 2 p.m., go join them out there. It's fantastic. Right in front of the Green Valley Market, 16166 Monkey Canyon Road. It's the third annual barbecue fundraiser. The food is good. The company is good. The entertainment is fantastic. A lot of fun, a lot of games, kids for kids, all sorts of stuff. And it's good. It's a good cause. So if you get the chance, you find yourself out Green Valley Way on April 20th, stop by and say hi. You can help them out. Maybe donate some money. Maybe buy some food there. And I think a good chunk of the food, I think it's 50% of the income they pull in is going to go straight to directly to helping people. So that's good stuff. Let's talk about some market stuff. Now that we're past that, our little public service announcement. As you know, once a month, I like to look at the market numbers for our area and for the San Fernando Valley and tell you what's going on exactly directly from the Southland Regional Association of Realtors, from the MLS. Southland Regional, a group I'm a proud part of, have been for many, many years. And these are the latest numbers. So in the Santa Clarita Valley, the median sales price of this includes single-family homes and condos is now $800,000, which is up a little bit from last month, from February, up by about $20,000. February we were $780, now we're at $800. And just to give you a little primer here, in March we were down 10. So in March we were $760, February $780, now $800,000. I think tells you the story about what's going on with prices. The single-family home is now $910. That's up $35,000 from last month. Now, it's not like the market has gone up $35,000 on each individual home. That's the median, so we're selling a lot more expensive homes. That's the result of the interest rate coming down just a tiny little bit to under 7%. Some of the more expensive stuff is selling, so that's what's kind of moving these numbers a little bit. And condos are up to $603 on average, which is crazy. Condos are up $58,000 on average from just last month. The average condo sale in Santa Clarita Valley last month was $545, which was up $5K from the month before. The average in March, $603. So if you own a condo in the Santa Clarita Valley, you might want to give some thought to selling it. I wouldn't wait if I were you because I doubt that number is going to hold. It'll go down a little bit, go up. And of course, it depends on, we're talking about all condos and townhomes. We have a pretty vast range in the Santa Clarita Valley. But the average right now is $603, which is up quite a bit from last month. And here are the bigger numbers. There are 277 new listings in the month of March. That's down 8. That's not much. There are 408 active listings. That's down 11. So stuff's still moving. And here's the biggie, pending sales, 184 pending sales in Santa Clarita, and that's up 27 sales from the month before. So the market is definitely starting to move in Santa Clarita. It's pretty good. Let's take a look at San Fernando so you know what's going on there. Same sort of story. Average median sales price in the San Fernando Valley right now is $920,000 compared to $800,000 here. For single-family homes there, it's $1,045,000. So on the other side of the hill, it's a little bit more expensive than it is here. $1,045,000 is the average, and it's down $25,000 from last month. The average for condominiums on the other side of the hill, $615,000, where we're at $603,000, and that's down $14,000 from a month ago. So our numbers are going up a little bit, actually quite a lot. San Fernando Valley's numbers are going down a little bit. They're usually pretty homogeneous between the two. But theirs are coming down. Ours are going up. You'll see kind of a meeting of the minds there here, I'm sure, in the April numbers. We had 938 new listings in the San Fernando Valley compared to 277 in Santa Clarita, and that's up by 54 listings, 3% year over year in San Fernando. 1,406 active listings in the San Fernando Valley compared to 408 here. Now, obviously, the San Fernando Valley is much, much larger, but that's why you pay attention to the economy there because it affects us here. Just on the other side of the hill, we really are kind of the same economy. economy there. 525 pending sales, which is also up from the previous month compared to Santa Clarita's 184. And more importantly, 651 closed sales in the San Fernando Valley, 227 closed sales in the Santa Clarita Valley. Both of those numbers are up. Roughly 61 more closed sales in March in the San Fernando Valley, and 88 additional closed sales February to March in the Santa Clarita Valley. So what does that tell us? All of that tells us that the market is starting to unfreeze. The market is starting to move. Those numbers are still incredibly low, unacceptably low, especially about volume. Prices are all right, but the volume's way, way low. We're still not moving enough houses, not enough houses being sold. And that's a result of the interest rate. That's a result of the post-COVID economy that we're starting to emerge into. That's a result of all sorts of stuff. And we'll talk about that. We've talked about it before. Certainly talk about it again. But that is the market. So prices are coming up a little bit. The market's starting to stabilize. But what we need more than anything else to stabilize the real estate market, and I know I'm beating this drum a lot, but this is the silver bullet. We need to see interest rates go down. We need to see the average 30-year fixed mortgage be around 5.5%. That's the magic number. Even under 6 would be fine. And right now we're hovering just a tad under 7%, which is better than the 7.25% it was, but still not enough to move the market. And that's the Fed. And the deal with the Fed, for those of you who watch this or listen to the show regularly, you've heard me rail about this before. The Federal Reserve has this crazy idea that they're going to get inflation down to a target rate of 2%. And I just don't see that happening. They've been harping about this for the last couple of years. They've been wiping out segments of the economy, specifically real estate. They froze over the entire market with this nonsense. And I don't think 2% is a realistic goal. I'm not alone in thinking that, but it is problematic. And here's where I wanted to read you an article that talks about these things. This is one from ABC News, just from this week. It's titled, Fed Chair Jerome Powell Pumps the Brakes on Rate Cuts, because God forbid he'd allow some relief. Federal Reserve will see its inflation moves beyond its current rough patches before imposing highly anticipated interest rate cuts, Fed Chair Jerome Powell said on Wednesday. So he said they're not cutting anytime soon. Addressing a business conference at Stanford University, Powell touted the progress in the fight to cool price increase while acknowledging that such headway has stalled in recent months. Yes, because you've gotten as much out of this as you're going to get, and it's time to let the interest rate go back down. He said on inflation, it's too soon to say whether recent readings represent more than just a bump, Powell said. Given the strength of the economy and progress on inflation so far, we have time to let the incoming data guide our decision on policy. Okay, that's fine, letting data guide your decision. But just because you have good jobs reports, and good GDP does not mean the rest of the economy is healthy. What you are doing is you are sacrificing whole sections of the economy to prop up other sections of the economy. And you can only get away with that plate spinning, that juggling act for so long. You cannot freeze out the real estate economy, which is 33% of the GDP in this country is tied to real estate, residential real estate. You cannot freeze that out and expect a positive result. There is no soft landing to be had if real estate doesn't start moving. I mean, we are down on volume by 40 to 50% in most of this country. That means there are 40 to 50% fewer houses being sold than traditionally would because of interest rates. Anyway, inflation has fallen significantly from a peak of 9.1% about 3 years ago, but it remains more than a percentage point higher than the Fed's target rate of 2%. It's running about 3.2, 3.4 right now, depending on who you ask. At a meeting last month, the Fed opted to keep rates highly elevated. The Fed's fund rate remains between 5.25 and 5.5, which means that your interest rate on the mortgage market is around 7. That's how it translates. Matching its highest level since 2001. So in other words, it's as high as it's been since 2001, and that is not helpful. The move marked the 5th meeting in a row in which the Fed has left rates unchanged, marking a prolonged pause of the aggressive rate hiking cycle that started in March of 2022. The Fed said last month that it still needs to make 3 interest cuts this year. Well, we're already in April. When would you like to start making those cuts? Because we've all been waiting for you guys to do it. The rest of the economy, especially the real estate economy, we're all waiting for that to happen. So when would you like to start making those cuts? Because frankly, we're all getting a little tired. I feel like somebody who's dying of thirst in the desert, and Fed keeps telling me that the water's coming, the water's coming. Meanwhile, I am dying. And so is the rest of the real estate industry. You get the water here. You got to get this thing moving. This is nuts. It's April already. Hopefully June. We'll see. I mean, the next rate cutting opportunity, I think, comes up in May, but we're probably not going to see anything until June. It's just absolutely crazy. Now, as a result of this, another good article I'll read you guys real quick. Here's what we shouldn't expect from mortgage rates in April of 2024. In other words, what we should not see happen. And this is from Market Watch, which is a pretty good site for this sort of stuff. These are from experts all over these are from 5 experts all over the country. We shouldn't expect rates to suddenly skyrocket or plummet, according to Jacob Channel, senior economist at LendingTree. It's likely that mortgage rates will remain relatively steady, Holden Lewis, home and mortgage expert at NerdWallet. There will likely be continued volatility, Daryl Fairweather, chief economist at Redfin. Now, he's talking about the housing market itself. not necessarily just the interest rate. No sizable change expected, according to Jessica Lotz, Deputy Chief Economist and Vice President of Research at the National Association of Realtors, and likely to remain elevated as far as traditional levels, according to Hannah Jones, Senior Economic Research Analyst at Realtor.com. So what does all this mean? All these economists, all these experts in the market are saying the interest rate is essentially going to stay the way it's been. The Fed is going to say it's going to stay the way it's been. We do not have a lot of good news on the horizon. We're hoping that maybe in June they'll drop the rate a bit. So in the meantime, still high mortgage rates and home prices mean that housing will remain relatively expensive in April. Relatively? 7% interest rates on $1 million properties? That's not relatively expensive. That's really expensive. Buyers are eager for any affordability win, and demand will be strongly influenced by mortgage rate movement. Yeah, there's the understatement of the year. Affordability win and demand will be strongly influenced by mortgage rate movement. You think? Yeah, if the interest rate goes down, prices become cheaper. People can afford to sell who've got 4 and 5% interest rates. And again, I keep coming back to the statistic, and I don't know why I don't quote this more often. Fully 70% of every single mortgage in the United States right now has an interest rate at or below 4%. 70%. An additional 15% of mortgage rates at or below 5%. So fully 85% of every single mortgage, according to Fannie Mae, in the United States is at or below 5%. These are not people who are going to want to sell their house and move and go to a 7% interest rate. Now, you get that interest rate back down to 5.5%, we got ourselves a ball game. Now, there is some pressure coming. Lewis explains that early 1990 baby boom means that huge numbers of people are in their early 30s, and a lot of them are looking to buy homes. Most motivated buyers will accept the current level of mortgage rates and make offers when they find a place that's suitable. High mortgage rates aren't holding them back as much as a lack of inventory and high prices. I could not disagree more. High prices are absolutely holding people back. High interest rates are absolutely holding people back. If the price of bread goes up, you sell less bread. That's just the way it works in an economy that has stability, where bread has already been a commodity. Housing is a known economy, is a known quantity. In other words, you have housing data you can point to as to the value of the houses. It's very easy to figure out what something in general is worth. And so for the interest rates, for them to say it's more about lack of inventory and high prices is just silly. So it's going to continue to be expensive. Hopefully things will start to get better over time. We shall see. But really what we're looking for, audience, what we're looking for, everybody, is we need to see the interest rate come down. The Fed needs to take their foot off the accelerator. They need to let the interest rate, which if they just leave it alone, it'll do it on its own. The interest rate needs to come back down. They're worried about letting the interest rate come back down because that'll cause prices to go up, and it will. And they're worried the prices are already too high. The bottom line here is the Fed was late to the party. They acted very foolishly during the pandemic. They kept the interest rate artificially deflated during the pandemic, and as a result, we're now paying the price for that now. To every up, there's a down. To every down, there's an up. It all evens out at the end of the day, and the Fed was incredibly foolish at the outset of the pandemic. And because of that, we are now all paying the price, and will be till at least 2025, if not worse. So thank you, Federal Reserve. You're doing a bang-up job. Super happy to have you in our lives. Thank you for all of the nonsense that you do. I'm sure they have a greater goal in mind. I just don't get it. I just don't. I've tried to have people explain it to me, and everyone just kind of throws their hands up in the air, and they don't seem to know what the hell the Fed is doing. And what concerns me is I don't think the Fed knows what the Fed is doing. So yeah, so let's all say a little prayer that the Fed knows more than all the rest of us do, and let's all hope that they decide to drop that interest rate a little bit so the mortgage markets can get back to normal, and so we can get the real estate market back on track here, because it's all well and good if your house is worth it. It doesn't matter if nobody's there to buy it. Is your house really worth that inflated amount if nobody's there to buy it? That's more of a theological question, I suppose, or a theoretical question, maybe. Maybe it's a question for God. I don't know, but we got problems. Anyway, let's move on. So what we're going to do today, the rest of the day, the rest of the show today is going to be devoted to landlord-tenant stuff, because the laws have changed. It is ugly out there. It is problematic. The state is acting incredibly foolishly. They're going to create more homelessness with this problem. What they're basically doing, let me give you some basic statistics, and we'll go to break. We'll come back. We'll have Jane in. Statistics you need to know. First of all, nearly 30%, I think it's 28, 30% of all homelessness all homeless people in the United States, unhoused people, if you want to get into the vocabulary, in the United States are in California. And they don't come for the sun and the movie stars. They're also not generated here. A lot of them come from other states. The reason for that is, although the majority of the homelessness in California is homegrown, by the vast majority. And the biggest reason for that is it is very expensive to live here. And what the state has been doing to quote-unquote curb homelessness is going to make it worse. You do not fix a supply problem, because there are not enough rentals out there. If there were too many rentals, then what happened is prices would go down. There are not enough rental properties. There are too many people who want to rent them. That's what causes prices to go up. It's basic supply and demand. So you do not fix a supply problem, i.e. there are not enough rentals. You do not fix a supply problem by retarding supply. And that is what the state has done. They have made it more complicated for landlords. They have made it more difficult for renters. All of their attempts to make this a better situation, to curb homelessness in the state of California, their attempts are wrong-headed and foolish. They were clearly drafted by people who I'm sure have jobs at the State House, but have no idea how rentals work. I don't think they talked to a single person who actually is responsible for putting tenants in properties or representing landlords when they drafted this god-awful group of legislation, and it seems to be getting worse. It's very popular at city council meetings to say things like, we're gonna make sure that you only have to pay 1 month in deposit. Yay, lower deposits, that's great for tenants. Yeah, the thing is though, if landlords only can collect 1 month worth of deposit, guess who they're not going to rent to? The very people who need the lower deposit, the very people who have problematic credit, the very people who have problematic income, because landlords aren't going to take them. Because as a landlord, if you are taking less of a deposit, you are by definition, you have more risk. You have to offset that risk by getting a better tenant. Otherwise, you got a problem. So the marginalized people who need things to be more lax for them to be able to rent are not able to. This is dumb. This is wrong-headed. And mark my words, I'll be happy to take the hit if I'm wrong. But I'm telling you, at the end of this year, the homeless problem in California will be more acute than it is now. And if they don't get their heads out by the end of next year, it'll be way worse. I mean, I would not be surprised if our 28% number rises to 30 or 32% by the end of this year because of these ridiculous laws. Because now you're going to create a whole series of homegrown homeless who otherwise would have had houses that now we cannot get into properties. So we'll talk about all that. A little cheery thing to end on. We'll go to commercials. When we come back, we'll have Jane Sherman, and we're going to talk all about all things rentals, what landlords should do, best practices for tenants. We're going to try to give you a path through this mess, and I'll complain some more, and it'll be great. But we'll have Jane, and it'll be loads of fun. So yeah, please listen to the sponsors, and come back after the break. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. You've reached the Real Estate Fix with Rich on KHTS, FM 98.1, AM 1220, your hometown station. And we have a very special guest in studio today. I promised you guys we would. We have my wife, Jane Sherman, in. Hello. Jane is a real estate attorney. She also has her MBA. She's the more impressive member of the duo. I'll put it to you that way. But I like to talk more, so I get to do radio shows and things like that. And every so often I prevail upon her because she's the smartest real estate attorney I know. No offense to the other real estate attorneys that I know, but I'm biased. I ask her to come in every so often and go over this stuff because, frankly, this one, and this is why I asked Jane to please come in, we're going to talk about today. I'm usually pretty good at these things. I'm pretty good at reading off lists and knowing what I need to do with my job and kind of knowing why. But the recent changes in the law regarding landlord-tenants communication, rental, and everything, rentals and residential rentals, particularly in California, has changed drastically over the pandemic and has changed just again this month. And it's horrible. As I was saying before the break, I think it's completely wrong-headed, and I think it's going to create homelessness. It's not going to curb it. But I wanted to bring Jane in to talk about exactly what this stuff is. So without further ado, let me introduce you guys. To those of you who listen to it, you already heard her. Those of you who know us certainly know her. But let me introduce you to my wife, Jane Sherman, real estate attorney extraordinaire. Let's tell the people something about some of the new landlord and tenant laws.
First, thank you for having me in. I do appreciate the opportunity. I like to educate people and give them information because this stuff is really pretty confusing. Yeah, and it has to do with the landlord-tenant laws in general, but truly, it's really landlord restrictions. I'm not aware of any part of that adds something to what the tenants need to do. It's all extra things the landlords need to do, and that's over time has gotten pretty bad. The biggest change in recent years was the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, which is sort of the base of all of this. And that added in the biggest changes regarding rent caps and having to have a just cause for evicting a tenant.
That's the dreaded AB 1482?
Yes. And that started in 2019. I believe there was one small update to it prior, but there was a more substantial change that took effect actually just a few days ago. And that has to do with the fact, you already have to have now, if you fall under the act, a just cause for evicting a tenant from a property. It no longer is something you can do at the end of a lease term. Now, fortunately, most individual property owners are going to be exempt from this.
Well, let me translate a little bit before you too far and down the rabbit hole here. What she's talking about is that it used to be if you rented a house for a year, you had a year-long lease, pretty normal. At the end of that lease, if you're the tenant, you've done your part, landlord's done their part, you need to leave because your lease is up. There is no such thing anymore as a lease being up in the state of California.
And before you could stay and go month to month, and then either landlord or tenant could give 30 days notice and move. That
Yeah,
was the nature of it.
because your lease used to expire. It used to be up. There used to
Correct.
be a time. And at the end of the time in a contract that says at the end of this time you are supposed to move out, you are supposed to move out. But the state of California has now decided, in their infinite wisdom, that there is no such thing as a term. You just get to stay there. As long as you're willing to pay the rent, you just get to stay there. Now, the landlords can do some things. They can raise the rent at the end of a term, but they're very restricted. We're going to talk about that as well. But basically what the state has done has decided that the way to curb homelessness is to make it so that individual landlords, corporate landlords as well, cannot end lease terms. If the tenant's still willing to pay and they haven't missed a payment, they just get to, or haven't violated some other term of the lease, they just get to stay.
Yeah, that is certainly the biggest term, and they expressed it in terms of giving people reliable place to live, but that doesn't address the fact that the homeowner, the owner of the property, still has their obligations, and they might need to do something else with the property. They might not be collecting rent from the tenant and not be able to make the mortgage payment, and that hurts everybody along the way. But so I will say again that generally speaking, these terms are not going to apply to single family homes and condos owned by an individual. However, there is a big but there. You have to have the very specific written notice given to the tenant prior to doing anything about it. So if you are exempt from this, and for example, you are an individual owner of a single family home and the property has gone through a year lease, and say you want to move your child in, they're going off to college locally and you're fortunate to have a place and you want to move them in. That's not an option if you don't give, even though you qualify to be exempt from the rules and you should be able to do whatever you want with it, you have to have given the very specific written notice, which I don't know any individual landlords who really are up on any of this.
In other words, the tenant has to be given these disclosures. They have to be told that you are exempt in order for you to claim the exemption.
Yes, it's a very big difference because most landlords have not given any of this. But I will circle around to an exception to the exception, which is if you're using a professional, if you're using a realtor and you are getting disclosures and contracts done by that realtor, they know the disclosures to be used. So if you are using a standard California Association of Realtors form that is updated and current, you should have the proper notices in there.
This seems like a good time to interject this. We had a client come into the office recently who has had the same lease for about 14 years. He hasn't updated it. He's been very generous in keeping the rent where it is for 14 years. You can imagine what a good deal that is. But in putting together his disclosure package for him, and I've done this for many clients, but in this case I wrote them all down because we were going to talk about this on the show today. Let me give you just a partial list of the 15 disclosures that are now required. And a lot of these were required before, but you absolutely have to have these as a landlord. If you have a lease that does not feature these disclosures, you got yourself a problem. You are curtailing your own rights. There are, let's see, bed bug disclosure, CO2 disclosure, flood disclosure, lead-based paint pamphlet and lead-based paint disclosure, Megan's Law disclosure, mold booklet and mold ventilation addendum disclosure, rent cap and just cause disclosure. That's the big one. We'll circle back around to that. Smoke alarm compliance disclosure, water heater statement of compliance disclosure, SCV disclosure, let's see, fair housing disclosure, parking and storage disclosure, rental property can't read my own writing. Rental property owner disclosure, as if they don't know who the owner is. Earthquake hazard report, residential environmental hazards. To put together this package with the various disclosures, 98 pages.
That wasn't a contract either, if I
that's
understand. That's
not
not
the
the
lease.
lease.
That's just the disclosures.
Just the disclosures.
98 pages. So for a landlord to be in compliance, you need a minimum, because it's between 15 to 22, I think it's 15 to 22, I think. Yeah, 15 to 22 different disclosures. At a minimum, those are just the 15 I read off to you. Those are the ones at a minimum you have to have as a landlord. 98 pages of disclosures. And then you have to present that to the tenant and say, here's 98 pages. Please read through this and sign here, here, and here. That's great. That's the stupidity coming off of this. And all it does when you do all those disclosures is it puts you into compliance as a landlord, which now means you can use your rights as a landlord that never should have been taken away from you to begin with, but have been.
Yeah.
So, my favorite part of this, and we've been talking about this at home, I know we were talking about it this morning. Did you know that in California, a verbal lease is binding? Now, if you're a tenant or a landlord, you have a verbal lease, forgive me, but you're an idiot. You need to fix that immediately. You should never have a verbal contract that has anything to do with anything, certainly not real estate. But if you have a verbal lease, and Jane will correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have a verbal lease, you still have to have 98 pages of written disclosures. So
yeah, all the disclosures are the same.
So I can rent you my house. I can say, hey, on a handshake, I can say you can live in my house for the next year and give me X amount of dollars per month, and we're all fine with that. Here's 98 pages.
Yeah, although I'm not fine with the first part because I think you're crazy not to have a
But
lease.
I'm saying, legally speaking,
Yeah.
right? Talking to a real estate attorney now.
Yeah.
Legally speaking, it is permissible for me as a landlord and permissible for the tenant to enter into a verbal agreement for the lease itself, but the disclosures that go with the lease, those you have to have in writing.
Yeah.
That's the state of California. If that doesn't sum it up in a nutshell.
Everything that they do is to protect tenants. And I understand that there are some bad landlords out there and have done some bad things.
I'm on the tenant side 99% of the time. This is just stupid. And what really bothers me about this more than anything else is it is bad for tenants.
Yeah.
This is going to devastate the very people that they're trying the most to protect. People who have credit problems, people who have income problems, people who have immigration problems. There is no way that a decent landlord is going to go into any of the government-sponsored programs right now if they have a choice, because they're much more likely to default. And now you're a landlord who can't pay their mortgage, who's got somebody living in a house that you're going to have trouble evicting them. That's insane. That is absolutely insane that the state has done this.
Yeah.
Verbal lease, but everything else has to be 98 pages. That's crazy. What you're doing with this state of California is you are driving the individual mom and pop landlords out of the industry. You're driving them out of the business, and that is who you need to solve this problem. California has a lower homeownership rate than any other state in the union. It has been that way since 1970. In 1970, it's getting worse every year. The percentage of owners in California versus the percentage of renters is worse than in any other state in the union. And as a result, we are now creating this permanent renter society in California that will doom us. That will absolutely doom us. I don't think you want every city in California looking like Manhattan, where there are very, very few people who own property and everyone rents because you can't afford to. It's not even a possibility to own.
Well, everybody gets a bump down. The renters become permanent. Mm-hmm. The people who are on the lower rung of being tenants and just hanging in there really don't have that option anymore. I personally know landlords, single-family homes and owners who in the past have rented to people with terrible credit and bad circumstances. They did a larger deposit and they were advised and they stayed on top of any notices. Sure. They would never do that now. I would never do it. I would never advise a client to do that. It's a bad idea. And in fact, in terms of encouraging consistency with housing and providing it, it does the opposite as far as I'm concerned, because a lot of the basic rules under the state law kick in after a tenant's been there for 12 continuous months. The attorneys I know will recommend that unless you are 100% certain and they have done everything right for 10 or 11 months, you evict them before the end of the year. That way you can still maintain more of your rights. And that's not good for anybody either.
This is insane. The state's also done nothing to reform the eviction process. It's still expensive and time consuming, not as bad as it was during COVID.
Yeah,
but
fortunately,
awful.
it's recovered mostly from that.
And again, I don't want you guys to get the wrong idea. If given a choice between tenants' rights or landlords' rights, I'm usually going to fall down on the side of tenants' rights. But it has to work for everybody, otherwise the system collapses. There are no tenants without landlords, or no landlords without tenants. Both sides have to have an equal stake in this, and everybody has to get something out of it. And by the state putting their thumb on the scale the way they've done, this will be a disaster. We already have more homeless in California than any other part of the United States. It's not even close. We have more homeless here than any place else. And instead of investing in programs to curb that, which we're doing plenty of, but we should do more, instead of doing things to incentivize mom and pop owners, you want to solve homelessness? Make it better, give people tax write-offs to become a landlord. That's how you fix it. You do not fix a supply problem by retarding supply, and that is what they are doing. You increase supply, you don't reduce it. And the state of California just never got that memo, because I am convinced not a single person in the state of California that had anything to do with AB 1482 or any of the laws that have come from since it knew a damn thing about real estate. They do not represent renters. They do not represent landlords. They are not renters and they are not landlords. Or at least have a very jaundiced view if they are, and they don't know what they're doing. They're doing something that is populist in city council meetings without explaining what the consequences of these actions will be. It's very nice that Pasadena and Santa Monica now have some of the most restrictive rules in the country for landlords. And what will happen as a result is there will be fewer renters in both of those places. There will be fewer landlords, there will be fewer renters, and the rents that are there are going to skyrocket. That's what will happen, supply and demand.
Speaking of which, the most recent changes that took effect on the state law, the Tenant Protection Act, were introduced by a local congressperson. I won't cast blame there, and add even more restrictions to the circumstances. So in the few times when you can, what's called give just cause to a tenant to evict them, two of them are substantial remodel to the property and moving in yourself or direct family member. But now, for both of those items, you need specific written disclosure ahead of time, and you also need a dramatic amount of additional information. If you're moving in a family member, you have to give them written notice of the name, who they are, their relationship to you, and the tenant is allowed to ask for proof.
That seems reasonable. I should have to go to a tenant and explain who my family members are. That seems perfectly reasonable. That's not invasive.
The family member has to move in within the first 90 days and has to stay for at least a year. If you're doing a remodel on the property, this is probably where it's going to hit more people and get worse. If you're doing a remodel on the property, you have to give them the notice describing the work in detail ahead of time. Some more detail is fine, but you have to have already received the permits for the work, and you have to lay out a lot more information than before. And God knows how long it's going to take to get permits sometimes. Depends a lot on the local
It's also
government.
not just that. If you're like, let's say you have a family member, you want to move into the house, lease is up, you want to move a family member or yourself back into your home. You may have to pay, even though the lease is up, you're going to probably have to pay the tenant to move out.
Well, this is where you got to keep up on stuff, because that's just cause, which may not apply if you're a single family homeowner, an individual, but you have to be in an incorporated area. Otherwise, you also fall under the county rent control and rent cap rules. And that would be in our surrounding area, Castaic, Stevenson Ranch, Valverde, places that aren't in an unincorporated city like Santa Clarita. You have these issues. You can be a single family owner, an individual owner of a home that you got from family, you inherited, and you had a renter in there. And you have to have just cause. You cannot move in whoever you want for just any reason.
Tenants now fall down into two categories: either just cause eviction or no fault. So they're either at fault or no fault. No fault, you can't evict them. At fault,
right?
They don't pay the rent or they violate the lease, then you can evict them.
Well, just cause you can under
just
limited
cause, even though it's no fault because you're moving back in. But the
but
rules
then you have to pay
follow.
relocation funds as well. So that becomes very messy. I don't know a lot of people with an extra $10,000 to $20,000.
Let me see if I get this straight.
To pay their tenant.
I rent a house to somebody for a year. At the end of their lease, I say, I want to move back into my house. Now I have to pay them to get out of my house, even though their lease is up?
If your house is in certain areas.
That's nonsense.
Yeah.
That is complete and utter nonsense.
Yeah.
Again, what that does is disincentivize renters. It is an absolute and total disaster, and it is only going to get worse. There's some of these laws I want to touch when we get back, but we got to break for a break. When I hear from some of our advertisers, I always forget to do that, get in trouble. So let's hear from the advertisers because they pay for the show. And when you do support some of the advertisers, you do support the show, so please do that. We find that very, very helpful, and they like it a lot. So if you would, please listen to the advertisers during the break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some more stuff and kind of go into best practices stuff. You're listening to The Real Estate Fix with Rich on KHTS, AM 1220, FM 98.1, your hometown station. Listen to the break. We'll be back. Hello, everybody. You've reached The Real Estate Fix with Rich. I'm your host, Rich Szerman, on KHTS, FM 98.1, AM 1220, your home station. Thank you guys for listening in. The last quarter of the show here. Last third. I know how math works. Last third of the show here. We have a meeting with real estate attorney and MBA extraordinaire, my wife, Jane Szerman. And we've been talking about, I should lead with my wife. That's the part I'm most proud of. My wife and attorney and MBA extraordinaire. Anyway, Jane Szerman, and we're talking about landlord-tenant laws and how things have changed in the state over the last couple of years and just the insanity that the state of California has entered into regarding landlord-tenant and how it will absolutely exacerbate homelessness because literally, we were just talking before the break. If you're a landlord and you have a lease, you need to have 15 separate, distinct disclosures, some of which are in the lease, but if you have done a CAR lease, otherwise you're out of compliance and you lose your rights as a landlord. So it's like the magic thing. You have to have these disclosures to the tenant to magically be able to retain your rights as a landlord.
Yeah.
And that's crazy because there are certain exemptions you have if you have less than 4 houses with one law, less than 2 houses with another law, and it's all very Byzantine. But you even lose those exemptions if you don't make the tenant aware that that you have that right.
Yeah.
And you don't just have that right because you fit those categories. You have to, part of exercising your rights is you have to give notice to the tenant that you have those rights, which is kind of an un-American thing to do if you ask me.
Yeah, one of the few areas that we do that.
Yeah, usually when we have laws, the laws dictate you have these rights. That's it. If you want to be aware of the law, look it up. That's the way that works. Not I have to make you aware. But that's the way it is now. And I don't see how that's protecting a single tenant or a single landlord, but sure, I guess that's what the state needs. So fine.
I don't object to putting it in all the contracts. I think that's a very good idea. People should know, but it shouldn't be that you lose your rights if you don't have it in there.
But look, it was dumb enough when the state insists. There's a disclosure that I've been screaming about my entire real estate career. It's called the lead-based paint disclosure. And what it says, right across the top, it says only applies to houses built prior to 1978. Yet it is required in every single real estate transaction. It is required in every single lease. I have a client right now, we were just talking to him last night. His house was built in 2004. So he said, Rich, I think you included this lead-based paint thing and we don't need that. I said, yeah, you do.
Yeah, you do.
He said, why? I said, well, because if somebody wanted to eat the paint in your house, they can chow down on a windowsill if they'd like. No danger of lead poisoning. But should they go rent a house someplace else that was built prior to 1978, having nothing to do with my landlord or nothing to do with the disclosure that tenant is getting, they should know that they shouldn't eat the paint. So just so all you listening, maybe I'll do my part for this disclosure so maybe we can stop using it. If your house was built prior to 1978, for God's sake, don't eat the paint. But if your house is built 79 or after, chow down. I like a nice periwinkle myself with some fudge, but that's just me. You should be eating paint to begin with. Why don't we have a disclosure that says that? But no, Board of Realtors, California Association of Realtors says must be included in every single transaction, even though it says only applies to 1978 houses right on the, and there are two of them now. There's one for sales and there's one for rentals. It's not even a standard form. That's the kind of nonsense. That was bad enough. But having this nonsense where you cannot ask a tenant to leave at the end of their lease term just because they paid their rent on time, you're actually better off if a tenant pays late or if a tenant doesn't pay at all.
Oh, yeah, because not paying rent or breaching the lease in a material way is one of the few ways you can, across the board, get a tenant out. They are doing you a favor sometimes by doing that.
Let's talk about that a little. Talk about the difference between at-fault or no-fault and at-fault tenancy and kind of what the differences are there. I know that's a big topic, but give us a little about that.
Yeah, just generally, I mean, it's kind of what you'd expect. There's, in situations where you need to be at fault, typically it's going to be you're behind in the rent.
In other words, the tenant does something to breach the lease, then they're at fault.
Material breach of the lease. It's what you would commonly think of as
they're
at fault.
They're not supposed to have dogs. They do.
Right.
Something like that. I mean, there's all kinds of things a landlord can use.
Yeah, they're selling drugs out of the garage. I mean, there's a long list in the code section. And for some reason, unlawful activity is different than illegal activity. And, everything gets its own, subsection.
So if you're a tenant and you're paying your rent on time, you get to just stay there. Doesn't matter if your lease is up. If you don't make your rent on time, or you make some other mistake, then the landlord can evict you. And an eviction right now in Los Angeles County, anyway, is running on average about 60 to 90 days, and it's going to cost you about $2,000. If they answer the eviction, then you're probably looking at about an extra $1,000 in an extra 30 days.
And that's assuming you've stayed up on your disclosures and your leases and all of that. And that's why ultimately at the end of the day, there are so many different terms here. I could go on and list things, but I hope nobody's writing this down with a pencil because you're never going to get all of it. There's too much. You have to have a professional involved. As a landlord, my number one and only advice that you have to listen to, hire a professional. If you get a realtor, you have them check out the situation. You make sure you've got a current lease and a current contract and current disclosures, and then do so yearly.
And when you do pick somebody out, when you do hire somebody as a landlord or as a tenant as well, make sure they're competent. If they don't know that about these 15 disclosures, up to 22 depending on the type of property, if they don't know that's necessary for both landlord and tenant, if they don't know that the landlord loses their rights if these disclosures aren't in place, if they don't know the changes in the law and stuff, and ask a few questions. If they don't know, do not have them represent you, because I found unfortunately there are a lot of people in real estate who don't know these laws either. They haven't bothered to look them up. And I know it's a nightmare because we're dealing with tenants right now that ordinarily would be able to get into properties. Because of this change in the law, we cannot get them housed because no landlord will touch them because they have credit scores below 600 and they have jobs with not enough money. They don't have 6 months worth of rent, that kind of thing.
Landlords don't want to take the risk.
They don't want to take the risk. They're not poor enough for Section 8. And they're not rich enough to actually get into a regular house, and they're getting squeezed. And that's only going to get worse. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. This is the most wrong-headed thing. So all of that being said, if you are listening, if you do have any questions, give me a call. I'll be happy to get you to Jane, or I'll ask her and she can tell me and I'll tell you. But you can reach me anytime, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is my personal cell phone number. I do give it out on the air all the time.
It is
661-714-1400. Those of you who heard Jane complain, she doesn't like it when the phone rings at 2 o'clock in the morning. Lately, she's taken to sleeping on the couch in the bedroom because that gets away from the bedroom if the phone rings. We've been getting a lot of calls on this. 661-714-1400. That's my cell phone. You can reach me at that any day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 661-714-1400. If I don't answer, send me a text. One last time, 661-714-1400. 714-1400. I thank you guys for listening. It's been a great show. Thank you, honey, for coming in and helping us out a little bit. I appreciate that very much.
You're
And if
welcome.
you guys do have any questions, just call us, email us,
Yeah.
text us, whatever. We'll get your
Yeah.
answers, your questions answered. So thank you
Absolutely.
for coming in. Thank you, Andrew, for producing the show today. And thank you guys for listening. I'm your host, Rich Szerman. You've been listening to The Real Estate Fix with Rich on KHTS FM 98.1 AM 1220, your hometown station. You guys have a good week and be good humans.